city as much. So just you know, those would be like examples actually of light industrial stuff that would require some light industrial zoning from the municipality in order to have them happen, and it's kind of a simple thing to set up with a group of cooperative owners or as a membership model.
Those are both great ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So what are the barriers to getting those things up and running? Is it the zoning?
Yeah, I think part of it is the organization piece around, you know, like tourism operators have 6 months where they can't do anything to think about infrastructure because they're like busy operating, and then the rest of the time is like in the downtime. So it's like part of it was getting organized. I think the thought was even having the laundry down at we have this little building that you see when you just walk off the ferry there. There was one spot in there that was going to be used for the laundry.
Which building?
Rondi's building, the utility.
The new building?
Yeah, the boathouse, because it's got some light industrial uses.
This is kind of partly why we were thinking about this position, because I think the amount of energy and organisation that is required for this type of process is considerable. So that's why we thought having somebody who was, and it would be between, it would include the tourism part.
Yeah.
Would be very powerful.
When you talk about the impact of the economy on the community rather than the other way around, you know, that's kind of like fits right into the kinds of issues that we struggle with here. The impact of tourism on the community. We're becoming one of those communities that's just like, you know, massively impacted by what happens here, and we're starting to ask questions around like, how do we manage that? How do we get value added from that? And for me, it's also about like, how can our community better benefit from that as a community, not as a local economy per se.
Yeah.
But to take that CD approach first.
So there's an active tourism like master plan, isn't there, for the island? Or is there something that is guiding that tourism?
There is a plan that was put together with Cooperation Destination BC. I think it's a couple years old now.
Yeah. But it's probably been more successful than anyone imagined.
Yeah, that's the problem.
And it's victims of our own success. So in the summertime, it's rather grim for residents and can be for some tourists.
Yeah, we don't have enough capacity.
So is that like they're flooding off the ferry, and all of a sudden the village is just overrun with?
Yeah.
Yeah, you see, there's no real
There's no food
there's no real process around the tourism strategy. You know, maybe it was done with Destination BC, but the community has not been involved, and so the tourism promotion is unconnected with what the residents want, and I think the residents are feeling a little resentful about the number of tourists and the way it's been done in some respects.
Especially in regards to infrastructure, I think that's the tough piece, because when all of the residents and tourists rely on infrastructure being the ferries, and then also somewhat the bus system. So with the extra tourists, it just really interrupts how people do things. So.
And even our stores and restaurants. I mean, the restaurants run on food.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
This is like almost like what we need is like a pop-up more. Do you know what I mean? It's like pop-up capacity. That on certain weekends there could be a few more food. Like if we had like 8 food trucks or something that showed up, that it could absorb those kinds of things. Or if we had the ability for you know, like expandable taxi service or an expandable bus service or something that would meet with demands and that kind of stuff. It's like, how could we grow the capacity like a jellyfish, right? It gets bigger when it eats, and
It's also it's a kind of complex question, because you continue to grow the capacity, like you could continue to build more roads for more traffic, but there's also a question of what kind of tourists are you attracting, and what's the brand of the island to promote those tourists. It needs to be more considered, I think, that we attract tourists who are spending more time here, doing things that are more compatible with the brand and the wishes of the residents. So it's not just a question of building suddenly more capacity. That's why I think having the process of the community involvement in saying things would be really powerful.
I don't think Tourism Island would be, you know, averse to that kind of input at all.
No, I don't think so.
it's just
I think
creating the
it's just a matter
space
of
for it to
energy,
happen.
and I think they'd be really open to it. You
Yeah.
know, I think it's just.
I am actually going to work with them in the new year on the Villages of Anyway
Good.
too. But because I think now they're realizing like it is massively successful. It was mostly a marketing campaign. So, you know, we get lots of people over here. We've got some great products to bring them in. We've got some good brochures and really good, even stuff that talks about our values. Like it's pretty clear when you're coming over here what you're coming into. And that makes it just all the more attractive for people that are looking for something that's not Whistler or it's not, you know. So I think you're right. Like I think we're at a place where people would be more willing to open up that conversation and say, how can the community help guide and design what are the flexibility in our tourism capacity, the flexibility in, because an economy like this, it's not, you don't want to build more road, you don't want to build more permanent infrastructure for tourists. You want to build flexible infrastructure because the rhythms are way out of our control. Like we don't control the rhythms, but we can become like a salt marsh and absorb the flood.
I'm not sure that, you know, that could be the case, but there's other examples out there in tourism where people have successfully controlled the ebb and flow of tourism. I mean, Whistler's an amazing example because Whistler 10 years ago had very little summer traffic, and now their summer businesses are equal to their, not bigger than their winter business. So we could make this, do much more to make this an all year round place. Like things like having the village as a venue and having small events and workshops and things that would draw people in the winter time.
Yeah.
Just a couple of points. You asked about the obstacles to the light industrial and whether zoning was an issue. And we're currently in the, it's not the beginning stages, the draft bylaws are there for zoning part of our community lands as light industrial. So for example, space in that area for a cooperative toilet paper business.
Yeah.
You know, that could fit in there. And the hope is to get the zoning completed for that area and the community consultation done before our term is up. So that's in the works. The other thing that's almost unique about Bowen Island is that we don't have a business licensing program. Our businesses come and go. And one of the major pieces of work that we did in the past year in this committee was to conduct a feasibility study for business licensing, and it was presented to council and accepted. And at our strat planning session last week, the decision was made to go forward with business licensing. So that's helpful in terms of getting a better sense of what the actual landscape is here, because a lot of it is anecdotal. And in many instances, all we really see are the folks who are bricks and mortar businesses or who are actively advertising their services to a local audience. But there's a lot more than that going on here. The third point is that in terms of tax breaks for businesses, our residential and our commercial tax rates are the same, and that's unusual as well. As far as sort of getting around the island, TransLink has actually been looking at a number of small pilot projects that would make Bowen more accessible to its residents, but also to visitors. So there's a pilot program that is apparently going to go ahead. We don't quite know the shape of it yet, for an on-demand bus service using current capacity. And the second thing that they're looking at, this is a little less far along, is expanding the handy dart service over here, so that that could also help with at least residents moving around. And then just the last point, the food trucks and the pop-up capacity. Our land use bylaw prohibits food trucks. And in discussion with some of the local residents, they weren't keen on having food trucks over here unless there was a business licensing program in place. So if pop-up food trucks actually would be a good thing for us to do, if we're moving forward with business licensing, then some sort of recommendation from this group to council saying, you know, given the challenges we faced in the past year, could you please revisit that part of the land use bylaw? It's a very specific change. It wouldn't take much to alter it. I don't think, it's not an OCP amendment, it's a land use bylaw amendment. I mean,
And also maybe
do it.
having some piece supporting local businesses doing it, rather than opening it up to having people from
Maureen, question.
Sure.
Is that licensing, or does that include home-based businesses?
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Just how far down it drills is something that municipal staff are figuring out. So for instance, one of the conversations we had, I think at this table, was, you know, if somebody's making craft items for sale at the farmer's market or Christmas market or something like that, do you really want to pull them into a licensing system? So staff will look at that and figure out what their capacity is and kind of support. They'll need, likely will figure out some alternative. I think one of the things we found was when we were looking at how other communities handle that kind of thing, in at least one community, it was the market that got the license. And if you were part of the market, you didn't have to get a license personally. So.
You guys have good problems.
Yeah.
These are good problems to have. It's not bad problems. And it sounds like there's actually, like, you've identified a lot of work that could happen. So I wasn't quite sure, like, I was coming over, like, what to hear, and it's all like some really good, these are really good ideas. And I really do think that whether it's an organization locally, or whether it's a staff person, it sounds to me like someone's got to, like, own this and do it, because it doesn't strike me as stuff that should be done just off the side of people's desks.
How could this fit in? I've heard of other, did you want to say anything, Cheryl?
I just, Shana actually, so I'm just really interested in some of the first things that Wes said about self-reliance and alternative thinking about prosperity and progress. And so I just have a couple of questions. First of all, I'm really interested in what the metrics are for genuine progress indicators versus GDP and kind of how you measure alternative ideas of prosperity and progress. And secondly, I'm really interested in Acme Energy, that example, because in some ways on the island we're incredibly self-reliant, and in other ways the island's limitations are our major constraints. And so I'm thinking specifically about energy. We pay 3 times more than they do in West Vancouver for our energy, and food, we pay extraordinarily high costs for food, and internet, we have kind of a last century connectivity, and I think those are major barriers to business, and also just increase the cost of living on that and decrease the standard of living. And so I'm really interested in Acme Energy, which tackles energy and food at the same time.
So, great questions. I don't know if you can see it on the screen.
Shana, are you watching this as well? I just sent you a link.
Oh, sorry, no, I'm just listening.
Okay,
Oh,
I
okay.
sent you a link about half an hour ago to the video, if you want to look at the graphic that
Sure, okay.
Right. So the genuine progress indicator, a lot of this stems from the United Nations development goals. So for years and years, going back into the Ottawa Convention, like the early 80s, and the Brundtland Report, even before that, we started having these conversations about what do we mean by sustainability, and we started out having that thought, well, maybe it's the stool with the 3 legs. And as time has gone by, the type of indicators have sort of grown and become a little more complex. And so just to list off some examples, the genuine progress indicator looks at social, economic, and environmental indicators. And so things like lost leisure time or rates of education in your community, looking at crime and family breakdown, you know, in communities. That's on the social side. On the environmental side, you know, looking at things like net loss of farmland or forests or noise pollution, you know, the rates of complaints about noise pollution or air pollution or water pollution in an area. And in terms of economic, you know, looking at income inequality. So it's not enough to say if GDP is growing, to more specifically answer your question, if GDP is growing, that doesn't tell us if it's growing equitably. And so income distribution is an important way of verifying, well, if GDP is growing, is this a good thing, or is it all accruing to 1% of people on Bowen Island? Not that I think that's likely, but you know, this is what we've been seeing at a macroeconomic scale, you know, across the world, is that the economy has grown, you know, exponentially in the last few decades.
So it's not enough to say if GDP is growing.
Oh, me echoing?
No, she just
She's
looked at
watching
the
you now.
video.
Oh. So GDP is a very simplistic and incomplete indicator of really how well a community is doing. One of the best things in terms of Vancouver's GDP is for a major earthquake. So if we're measuring economic success by GDP, that's how much money exchanged hands, you know, in Vancouver, how much insurance payouts happened after the earthquake, you know, how much new stuff was bought to repair and rebuild all the buildings. Doesn't take into account the human devastation, the loss of lives, the emotional toll in the community. So if you're using things like GDP to measure economic success in the community, you're just purely looking at a single bottom line, which is just how much money, you know, was exchanging hands in that circumstance. So the genuine progress indicator has been increasingly adopted at a larger, you know, not necessarily at a community scale, but more at a national or international type scale. And a lot of it stems from the United Nations Development Program and the work they've done on the indicators that they work with. But if you want a municipal example that draws from this, the Healthy City Strategy that the City of Vancouver adopted also draws from the UN indicators and is very similar to the Genuine Progress Indicator. So that looks at, you know, in terms of the economy, there's the making ends meet and working well portion of it, and also being and feeling safe and included in our communities in terms of the types of businesses and services that are there for residents. So if you want to look at the Healthy City Strategy, I mean, that's the overarching social sustainability plan for the City of Vancouver. The point I'm trying to make here is that you can look at the economy, if you just purely look at the economy in terms of money and growth, you're not going to be answering the question of really what's ultimately happening to people in their communities. You'll be answering the question of, is the economy growing? And if all we care about is the economy growing, then we're not going to care about the resource depletion, the unequal distribution of wealth, the stress on communities that are facing higher levels of household debt or working longer hours to keep up in a busier economy. So that's sort of the point I'm trying to make, is that you know, we need to do a better job of bridging the way we think about the economy and the types of outcomes the economy should power. Because if the only outcome we care about is growth in GDP, we're in trouble. And right now we're in trouble. We know that, you know, globally. So our thinking on the economy needs to evolve at the macro scale, and I think that the aggregate effect of communities thinking differently about how we measure community wealth and how we measure the impact of our economy can help in that bigger work.
It's really interesting.
Not to get too theoretical and like academic here, but
If you look all around that wheel, it doesn't mention housing anywhere.
yeah, but and so the United Nations indicators do, like, this is.
Okay.
I just use these as examples of like how what we measure matters.
Right.
So you look at the UN, you know, and that includes definitely housing or shelter, and you know, it includes 23 indicators, I think. Have a look at them though, but they, you know, that is increasingly where we're drawing the monitoring, the indicators are coming from that work.
We have time for a couple more questions. Only we could obviously talk about this all morning.
Well, I'm happy to hear that, because a lot of people would prefer not to.
It's a really, you're speaking to the choir here.
Yeah.
So Just a
Well,
couple
just
more
to
questions.
build off the last one, and Robin, maybe this is what you were gonna ask about as well, but one of the other main challenges that Bowen is having is with housing. So we have this increase in tourism, how do we work with it and make it work for us? And then also, housing everywhere in Vancouver, obviously, affordability is an issue. There's less available houses that are less affordable, so then you have labor shortages, which affect our businesses. So I guess my question is, do you have any examples of CED that's happened where the municipality or, government has been able to successfully integrate housing into the CED plan and how that was done and things that we could look at to model ourselves after?
Yeah, even in Vancouver, we're only beginning to really make that link. The way we talk, and not only housing, but the way we talk about transportation and transit. So we're building housing that's accessible to transit with our transit-oriented development. Is that close to where people need to work? Are we building too much housing on employment lands? Do we need to retain our industrial lands, for job spaces? But I think some good examples, in Whistler, when Ken Melamed was mayor and that council up there, they had a really interesting, it's like a land trust model that they developed where there's a long-term covenant on land that was built specifically, for affordable housing for the workforce there. And I think that's an interesting model to look at, is what Whistler did to try and address their housing there. Not to say there's a silver bullet, they still have housing challenges throughout the entire Pemberton, Squamish, it's growing so fast and there's so much pressure. But that is an interesting model, and Vancouver subsequently has now adopted a land use or a land trust model as well to build affordable housing. We've also seen, in Vancouver, the relationship between the social housing that's provided and the social enterprises that have been developed on the ground. And so trying to increasingly link up appropriate types of services and businesses that are often run by nonprofits. And so that connection is being made pretty clearly in Vancouver. I'm trying to think of any other examples. Actually, on the island, oh boy, it's right by Victoria. One of the First Nations there is really doing some innovative stuff around housing. I'm trying to remember which First Nations it is. I think it is the Esquimalt, yeah. So look at what they're doing maybe as well, because they've been doing some good stuff. That's right, Esquimalt.
My question kind of builds on that. Do you know of any examples of communities using like a community development corporation or that kind of model successfully? I guess in a smaller community.
Yeah, in the BC context, I don't think we've seen a lot of community development corporations like formal CDCs in BC. You look at the immediate urban example, Portland Hotel Society in Vancouver operates very similar to a CDC, I think. It has the social enterprises that provide all the goods and services they need for their housing. We're talking about thousands of people housed by them. Skill development training programs, peer supported employment for their people. So they operate very much like an inner city, CDC. But I'm trying to, there's one that's coming to mind. I can follow up with this, but I'm just trying to remember the case study. It's just American. There's good American examples of CDCs, and oftentimes they'll combine housing. Actually, in Edmonton, there's a really good CDC model. You look Martin Gerber, Conrad, I think. But you look at the Edmonton Foundation and the Edmonton Poverty Reduction Plan. They recently formed a community development corporation where the city of Edmonton gave them, I think it's about $20 million in property, and also gave them a few $1 million in operating funds. And what they've done is they're building a mix of housing, and they're combining, it's a mixed commercial and residential real estate portfolio in Edmonton with social enterprise retail playing a component there. So you want to look at a good CDC model that's not too far from home, that Edmonton model might be worth checking out.
Can I ask just a very quick question, probably we need to wrap up, but very crassly, how much does it cost to hire a CED officer? And should they be employed within the municipality, or should they be outside? Because this, what we've heard, is not really government initiative here. It's more government acting as a good partner. Should this person be employed outside of the municipality, say I don't know, maybe the Boeing Foundation, you know, to promote this stuff?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, and I'm reticent to try and give any sort of a definitive answer, but my gut tells me that you've got a lot to work with, and so once again, you know, you don't, in order to have a good process to get a strategy or plan, you don't necessarily need to hire someone in-house to do that. Like you could tender that and just, you know, be clear about the types of things that you want there, and an organization or consultants could possibly come in, you know, and we've got really great people in BC who could come in and help with that. But I think the question is like, how does it get implemented? And that's where the staff question, you know, comes up, because maybe it's not a full-time position, maybe it is a part-time, you know, position. Maybe it's not a staff person, maybe it's an organization that's given some resources to own it and like hold the pieces together. You know, we were talking earlier, it was 1,001 ways or 101 ways to skin a cat. So I think it's, you know, I'm a big fan of seeing municipalities hire someone to be a dedicated staff person to do this work, but I understand that there's competition for resources, and you've got to justify that to taxpayers. So I think you just look at the amount of work, and does the work plan become more clear? Like how many hours of work does it look like to do this, and does that warrant a staff position? And if so, is it full-time or is it part-time? Or is it like a coordinator role that you work with the foundation or someone, and you grant them some resources that they could hire, you know, a coordinator, staff person, or someone to implement these things with your partners. I think it's important too to draw from the resources of those other partners that are there, so it's not all on that staff person. Like that staff person is, don't think of them as like an administrative role so much as like they're convening, they're facilitating, they're pulling the resources and the people together, and your community partners can do a lot of the implementing, so long as everyone's on the same page about what's happening, where it's going. And that person can be integral to just making sure everyone's on the same page, and they do some administrative functions perhaps, where maybe they do take note-taking, and they do, you know, make sure that the lines of communication are open, and they make sure that we're avoiding duplication. But I think really think of them, like their role is to unlock the partnership potential of those other partners that implement this stuff together. It's not so much that they're the person doing everything and like, you know, administrating everything. It's more that they're like a glue that binds this thing together. That's a better way perhaps of thinking of that position. Whether that's internal or external, I think that it comes back to like the role they play. And it's important, I think, that they don't get like, if you are to hire a staff person in the city, they should be spending more time in the community than they are up here. You know, they should be really embedded in the community ideally, which is why, whether it's an internal staff person or you're just granting to the foundation or someone else for them to hire someone, and you have a liaison, or maybe this committee works closely with whatever community working group. You know, there's a number of different ways to pull everyone together, and I think you just need to work through a process of thinking which one of those makes the most sense, which one's maybe the most bang for your buck and would be most effective, and what you can ultimately justify to your tax-paying residents.
Okay.
But I think the value of having someone do that, I hope, would be clear, and you've got a lot to work with. So I think there needs to be someone that's helping to hold that together.
You keep saying foundation, you're talking about the community foundation?
Yeah, the Bowen Foundation.
Yeah.
Whoever
Bowen
it is.
Community Foundation?
I think it's just,
Yeah, just as an
it's just
example.
as an
It's just
example of a
as an
nonprofit, or
example.
an external,
Yeah.
Yeah.
external organization
Yeah.
outside of
Could be
this.
anyone, but just as an example, you know. So I'm really quite pleased with, we have a process right now in Vancouver where we worked with the Van City Community Foundation and granted through them to an organization that brought about 35 different community groups together, looking at all the different challenges and opportunities in the downtown east side. So they have a full-time director and a coordinator, and I regularly attend those meetings. Sometimes we'll have other counselors or staff attend those meetings. And we came up with the strategy together. The city granted them about $375,000 for a couple of quick start projects and for some feasibility research for some bigger, more ambitious projects. But they implement it, and they own it, and they drive it, And I think one of the reasons why it will continue to live on in community is because it's with them. Because governments change, mandates change, but communities have a little bit of a longer timeline. And so if you can come up with a process where you're empowering them and you're giving them the resources to implement this thing long term, I think that's a better model on the whole.
Yeah, okay, cool. Well, thank you very
Should we
much.
ask Cheryl?
Well, I think,
Any final?
we really, if we're going to do any of the other stuff, I think.
I have just a burning, I think, quick
Okay.
summary question. And that is, we talked since I joined the Economic Development Committee here for a year about changing the name to Community Economic Development Committee. And I've been caught up with not having the right one sentence elevator pitch. Why should we change the name? You know, when talking to a member of the public, why should we change the name to a Community Economic Development Committee? And I'm just like,
That's it. I think that's the
yeah,
answer.
so, well, but you imagine I'm talking to someone on the street.
Economics is 1/3 of the pie,
Right.
right? You say we actually want to add the other 2 parts of the pie. Like
Right.
that, am I, sorry to.
Yeah, well, yeah,
That's-
totally, I think that's a great
Well,
answer, and I wonder what Wes would say
Yeah,
if you were
sorry.
approached by someone on the street asking that, yeah.
Well, I think the simplest thing to distill it down to is that local economic development is talking about a place. Community economic development is talking about the people. And so if you want an economic development strategy that's concerned with the people, call it a community economic development strategy. If, you know, you know, that the community economic development is important in the distinction because, you know, it is the people that will drive it forward. It is the community that will drive it forward. It's not just a top-down initiative. It's from the grassroots up. And so the question again, what's the role of local government? Is that, well, how do we be a good partner so that we can resource community, we can align our policies, think about our land use planning to unlock the potential of the partnerships and the, you know, the upskilling and upscaling that can happen in that community. And it's more that partnership model. And at the end, it's about the people. You have great people in Bowen, and you know, let's unlock the potential they have to thrive.
Thanks.
Good question. Great. Absolutely.
That's a good pitch.
Thank you, Wes. Yeah. Thank you
Well,
very much.
thank you very much, Wes. That was really great. We should have had you here 2 years ago. But that's been really enlightening. So thanks very much for taking the trouble. And hopefully we can get this talk online somewhere so we can see it.
It's online now.
Yeah.
I'll leave some of my cards here.
Yeah, if we can follow up with you and, you know,
And
get in touch, that would be
I've got some follow-up stuff too around like some of the financing, municipal financing questions that were asked, and just a couple of questions here. I'm happy to follow up on that. And please be in touch. Like think of the university as a resource and think of this program as a resource. And if you have questions about moving ahead, like don't be afraid to reach out again.
cool.
And I think you guys have a lot to work with, and you're in really good shape. You know, and you got great ideas.
Thanks,
And
man.
I hope you enjoyed the book.
Excuse me, I just have to go to that.
Okay.
All right, thanks, man.
Thanks, Ron.
Thanks for some, Chris.
We finally meet.
Yeah, I was finally meeting. It was good, man. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Were you in this program?
No,
You know each other from somewhere else?
Yeah, we were,
Chris is a-
Michelle, so
Oh,
we were
yes.
emailing, and we met at the Local Economics Conference.
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Were you at the Senate?
Yeah.
Okay, so I was there around. Were you there on the last day?
Yeah, I was
Then we did the proaction
Around
campaign?
for a while.
Oh, we had an alumni
Oh, you missed it.
mixer that we had there.
So we're having a short break here.
Learning to action.
Well, it was beautiful.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, could I I wanted to get a picture of
So,
that.
Michelle, are you on the council here?
No, just on the committee here. But yeah, I had emails because we were talking about, I was interviewing for a position at SFU doing the managing the sustainability research. And then connecting that with the CED program. I get that.
Yeah, no, they're interesting
We'll talk
problems.
about that for sure, because
challenges, I mean, even with us,
There's like a living labs
We really-
program that they're
we
launching, which
have
I'm
it
gonna be
as,
coordinating. And it's all about
It's
using all the
increased
existing university operations as like a living lab
gallery
for
and
all the
because we're
research.
right there, front and center. And
I would like to
also
make it all like
will be
experiential.
see us.
You
So
guys-
that is, yeah, just trying to
Okay.
think about, well, that's great, because that means people coming in.
We should talk
But
about
for
this
some
one.
time management.
Do you know Curie Burger as well?
No, I'll
She
react to
did
that.
the local economic development.
Okay.
That's really
Good trust Canada.
So,
And so she popped up numbers and stuff.
on the plate.
Can I just put in for a second? If you need
So, a plan is important. Do a zone
Go up to the top.
hopefully February first. February.
So Steph, Cheryl Stacy.
11, yes.
Jump in with Cheryl now.
Thank you so
Okay.
much. I appreciate it.
Cheryl, are you still with us?
Cheryl? Hello?
Cheryl, are you there?
She might be on a short break. Nope.
She's got a meeting at 11. She might
Oh,
be-
does she?
She might be observed and prepping for it. Hello? She was here earlier.
Do you have a way of texting her? Or we'll send her a
I
message?
didn't
We'll
email her.
come back to her if she comes. So let's, we've got half an hour really to get through the other thing. So council update.
They mentioned here the rural dividend letter to Minister Donaldson. A letter did go forward to the minister. He's in charge of rural development, and it was to get eligibility for Bowen to apply on an ongoing basis for rural dividend funds. So we haven't heard back, and Cheryl may have an update because the letter was prompted in part by her suggestion. Municipal Housing Advisory Committee was established at, it would have been the November 27th